Bach's 6 Brandenburg concertos are amongst the most popular and accessible pieces of classical music in the repertoire, and one of them contained a moment that made me realise for the first time how astonishingly and achingly beautiful classical music could be. Now, Bach's 6 Brandenburgs are the most famous set of concertos ever written. But did you know they remained undiscovered for over 100 years after Bach's death, before a music scholar named Wilhelm Rust unearthed them in a library in 1849. The library belonged to the Margrave of Brandenburg, to whom Bach had originally sent these 6 wonders of the world back in 1721. The Marquis presumably buried them amongst the paperwork, where they remained, gathering dust for more than a century before our musical Indiana Jones, Herr Rust, stepped into that fateful library. The name concerto confused me when I was young. I thought concertos were for solo instruments playing against an orchestra, and I couldn't really hear any consistent solo instruments amongst these pieces. Well, concertos can also be for groups of instruments, not just solo instruments. Check out my video on the concerto for more. So, there's a spread of instruments in groups amongst the 6 concertos, and in actuality, each one feels quite unique. Number 5, for example, features soloists, harpsichord, flute and violin, but it's really the harpsichord that goes full guns blazing, particularly in its first movement solo, a high-octane Baroque version of the ultimate guitar solo. Brandenburg number 3 is taken with the number 3, and I mean taken. So we have 3 sections of strings, violins, violas and cellos, which are repeated in sections of 3, all playing contrapuntally. Quite unique. The 6th Brandenburg, another of my favourites, features the lower strings only, so that's a solo party of 2 violas and a cello, and no violins. No violins at all, in either solo band or the rest of the players. Pretty unique again. It gives the whole concerto a beautiful lower sonority. Which brings us to Brandenburg number 2, my personal favourite, since it contains a section that first turned me on to classical music. So, this particular concerto is for a solo band of 4 instruments: a violin, flute, an oboe and trumpet. Interestingly, these instruments cover the 3 main orchestral sections: strings, woodwind and brass. If you're watching the music, it's pretty obvious. The soloist band stands separately from the other players, so you can tell who the soloists are. But how can you tell what's going on if you're only listening? Well, by listening to the structure. This is Bach, and there's always structure. The piece starts with a tutti, the whole orchestra playing together. Then our first soloist joins in, the violin. There's another short ensemble, everyone playing together. Then our second introduction comes, the oboe. Orchestra together again before the flute stroke recorder appears. Same again, orchestra together before finally the trumpet. So in this first minute, there are 4 separate introductions of solo instruments, each framed by pillars of short orchestral bursts. Only there's more. This is Bach, of course there's more. Let's start again with the introduction of the second solo instrument, the oboe. Only this time, let's give ourselves a hearing test. Listen carefully behind the oboe. Can you hear the solo violin backing it? Here it is again, with the score. Now I go to the next solo instrument, the flute. Behind the flute, bopping away happily, is the oboe. Here it is again with the score. No prizes for spotting the backing partner to the trumpet, the flute. More precise structures now emerging. Each instrument is introduced, takes its bow, then retreats off stage quietly, offering a supporting role to the next instrument's solo spot. And, if you ever want to know what counterpoint sounds like, this is it. A separate melodic strand operating in counterpoint to the main melody. So far, so great, and all in a major key. Only now, we switch to a minor key. Ooh, something nice is approaching. This section actually uses an old harmonic trick, the circle of fifths. I have a video on that which I heartily recommend. Bach, being Bach, of course, overlays the already beautiful harmonies with more suspended harmonies like major sevenths from the trumpet and oboe. Amazing. This was the moment that really turned me on to classical music. And before I go, I just want to point out one final thing about instrumentation and Bach. This section has 4 iterations. The first 2 come with the trumpet and oboe, but the last 2 are led by flute and violin. Now, these instruments just aren't as strong as the trumpet with the melody. They never can be. I suspect a composer like Beethoven would have stuck to the trumpet for the end as well. But Bach, being Bach, means structure is everything. Each solo instrument must have its allotted time in the sun. It used to puzzle me that these final iterations were a little underpedalled, but that has never prevented this from being my favourite Brandenburg. Please like and subscribe.